It's the 10 to 1 podcast with your host, Brad Oman, featuring Ben Konowitz and Nate Loucks. And here's the podcast.
Hey.
Hey!
What was that? That was like a new SNL character you're working on?
Yes, I'm workshopping that one.
Good.
Hi,
Mildly excited
guys.
podcast host.
You don't sound like a ghost doing it anymore, Brad. I love it.
I never thought you sounded like a ghost.
Yeah, see, that's what I think too. But, Ben's just being mean because he's in a very warm place and we're in Coldville.
I know,
Yes.
seriously. It was where we're at in the Midwest was a balmy 50 degrees today, so we're fine, Ben. We don't need warm weather. All right.
Hey, it was 61 where I am, so
Hey, so do you guys even remember what we do on this podcast?
it's something about shoes.
Yeah, different kinds of shoes, pumps, sneakers, high tops, flip flops, Crocs.
All of the above.
Those are all the shoes, I think.
From sizes 10 to 1.
Yes.
Ooh.
I did it.
This is a Saturday Night Live podcast, and usually what we do is we will recap every new episode of SNL, talk about how much we like the sketches, what our favorite ones are, and whatnot. But we're in between episodes right now because of the Olympics, and we decided to do at least one episode where we did something a little bit different. We'll be back with another normal new episode after John Mulaney hosts this coming weekend to cap off February, and that'll be fun because he's joining the Five Timers Club.
Finally, the Olympics are over.
Tell me about it. I don't even pay attention anymore. I don't know if I ever did, really.
I didn't.
But so what we decided to do, in case you didn't know, this year marks the 30th anniversary of Wayne's World, which is the second ever Saturday Night Live film adapted from a sketch following the Blues Brothers in the 80s. And Wayne's World is actually the most successful Saturday Night Live film as well, grossing over $100 million at the box office, which is pretty cool. And so we just figured we'd have some fun digging back into both the Wayne's World sketches and the movie that premiered in 1992, actually on Valentine's Day. A great little date night movie back in 1992.
I didn't know that. Yeah, Valentine's Day.
Yeah, right on Valentine's Day. So to start off with, I thought we should talk about when do you guys remember the first time you guys experienced Wayne's World? Was it the movie? Was it the sketches on SNL?
It was the sketches on SNL, and I remember, again, so this is like the era, late 80s. I think the first one was in 89, 90. I was about 9 or 10 when I first remember starting to watch SNL, staying up late. So my parents are divorced. Every other weekend, I would sleep in the living room of my dad's house, and I would watch it. And I loved every second of it. And so these are some of the first characters that I remember as a kid.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And there was such a raw energy to the show back then, not just in Wayne's World, like the characters there, but there was so much good talent in there.
Yeah.
That I feel like we're almost pushing boundaries. Like you could tell now looking back that the show was in a major evolution at that season, and Wayne's World seemed to have a pretty important part in that evolution.
Yeah, it definitely felt like it brought it into like a different generation. Like it was really starting to like pass the torch from that cast that started the show, because the 80s were kind of rough and there's not really anything like iconic from that series with the exception of some things that like Eddie Murphy did and stuff.
Early 80s. There's a couple,
but like the 90s really like ushered in a whole new era for SNL. Ben, how about you with Wayne's World?
Ben, have you ever seen Wayne's World?
Yes, of course. One time today. So for me, it was the top 10 list. I remember Wayne's World and the top 10 list being hand in hand. So I remember Garth pulling the placard to the side and revealing the thing, and me immediately my dumb 10-year-old brain being like, "Oh, I wonder what the joke's gonna be." Like that was the fun part for me, and I always thought it was. I thought they did that every time. Watching some of these older ones, I realized it didn't start off like that, and so it was very interesting. But I do remember when I was a kid, I really, really loved of course, the energy. They're silly. They're saying, sphincter boy. They're saying words I'm not allowed to say at school. Like it was naughty and it was fun.
And we're a couple of years older than Brad, but Ben, do you remember going to school and being like, sphincter says what? and trying to get people to say what, it really became a part of the cultural lexicon in a way that an SNL sketch in my lifetime hadn't done at that point, and it was everywhere. It was just everything.
It taught me sarcasm for the first time, really, because you'd say, I like your shirt, not. Yeah. And that was a huge thing in 5th grade. Like I said it every day, and I'm sure the teachers just hated Wayne and Garth because of how much of the vernacular in small town Midwest happened. Watching these lately, you can really hear Mike Myers' Canadian accent, and I really didn't notice that when I was a kid.
Yeah, I'm not even sure as kids we were aware of like the differences between Americans and Canadians.
And I think that influenced the way I said it on the playground, though, because I'd be like, "No way!"
Yeah,
I thought that's the way you said that word.
Yeah. So you guys are like 4 or 5 years older than I am, and so for me, actually, my first experience with the world came from the movie, and I never actually owned the movie on VHS, but I would watch it all the time when we would go to my aunt and uncle's house because they had it on VHS, and that's where I would watch it repeatedly. Every time I went over there, I would watch it, and I loved it. I definitely, like Ben said, I learned sarcasm from that. There were so many things I would say from that movie, like right, and the not jokes and as if and doing schwing and all that stuff. And so when I was around that age, and I would stay up late enough to see SNL, and I started I knew when that Wayne's World was from Saturday Night Live, and if I was up late enough, I would watch it with my parents and hope that there was a Wayne's World sketch, and most of the time ended up being disappointed. But then I also came to love SNL because of that, because I started seeing what else was on the show, and I started liking Chris Farley and other stuff that Mike Myers and Dana Carvey did, and really starting to engage with the show beyond Wayne's World. But it was really interesting how the sketch evolved across the history of it. So if you go on YouTube right now, they have Saturday Night Live YouTube channel has every Wayne's World ever, and it's separated into 3 different parts, and it starts
22 of them.
Yeah, it starts at the very beginning and goes up through the mid 90s. It doesn't have the Madonna sketch though, and I think that's because of music rights.
Could be, yes. And there's one that was the season 18 episode 8 one. So I read about this one in one of the SNL books as I was preparing for this episode. Yeah. They made fun of Chelsea Clinton in that episode.
I actually looked that up because I noticed a weird edit in one of the sketches.
Yeah. So it could have been that episode, where essentially they pulled the sketch from future airing. And
because I read and I found an old
no, they could have edited that out and then put it back in.
Seattle Times newspaper. They said that in subsequent airings they cut that joke out.
Because and again, and Brad, you can talk about a little bit later of what you learned about Lorne Michaels in talking to the director of Wayne's World, because I think you learned just as much about him probably as anybody. But he doesn't like to punch down, and so he really felt that was punching down. Obviously, you're picking on a kid.
Well, there's a lot of backlash too. Yep. So the joke was apparently. So she was number 2 on a top 10 list of things that they didn't like about Bill Clinton. And she was number 2 and Chelsea Clinton. And they basically said that as an adolescent, she was like a future babe, And so it was like a weird, kind of reference to, because she was
a teenager clearly. Right. Yeah. So it's you probably can't do that.
So there's a really a quick, almost unnoticeable edit they make in that sketch that is still in the ensemble on those YouTube roundups, and then it just goes straight to a live from New York from Saturday night, which I'll lead that into talking about. I was surprised by how many cold opens Wayne's World was given, considering we don't really do other sketches outside of political stuff anymore.
And it started as the 10-1, right? So it started as essentially a throwaway sketch. Like, you guys have your fun here at the 10-1. And then I wonder how many other 10-1 sketches have gained obviously not that much popularity, but essentially went from the 10-1 to the opening, right? Because there's been 22 Wayne's World iterations on SNL throughout the years. Most of them, obviously, they've come back a couple of times, I think. And
knowing that there is 22, I don't think that those YouTube roundups have every single.
They might not,
especially because I don't think that they have the later ones they did for the 40th anniversary and
within the last 6 years. I think they've done 2, even so. They've got a couple in there, but anyway, you look through those and you see them. And you realize that they knew they had a hit because it was on, let's say, 3 times in the first year, right? And so anytime you have a repetitive sketch, you're doing something right. In the second year, in season 15, it was on 6 times.
Yeah.
I don't know of another sketch character that's been on like 6 times in a season like that. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, I know of 3, maybe 4, but 6 is a ton in one season to put a character on.
I mean, it could be. I feel like most of the characters that did do it were the ones that ended up getting movies because they were so popular.
Pat, these kind of things.
Coneheads, Sister Mary Catherine Gallagher, the Night the Roxbury guys, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe Will Ferrell and
the cheerleaders.
The cheerleaders, they could have, because I do remember quite a bit of those sketches. But anyway, interesting kind of just to see the evolution that I was also reading for our listeners. That again, Conan O'Brien and his writing partner Robert Smigel are on the staff of SNL when Mike Myers is there, and essentially Conan tells him, "This isn't anything, right?" And so Conan tells the story that essentially Mike Myers still brings it to the read through, and he's going to try to push it. And Conan, the way, of course, Conan tells it is the only way Conan can tell it because he's such a gifted storyteller. But essentially, he says, I think this guy's just going to have to learn, right? He's going to have to get cut down on his own. And, and Conan's like, in hindsight, he doesn't know, And I thought about this, like, how many sketches, like if they would have listened to Conan and Robert Smigel, 2 of probably the best comedians, comedy minds have come out of SNL, right? I mean, everyone that's been on SNL says, that was with Conan, says he was the funniest guy there.
Yeah.
How many sketches didn't make it just because somebody said, I just don't think that's it?
Yeah, exactly. That's crazy.
But it did. And I think, again, probably the most successful sketch franchise of SNL history, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, at least when it comes to, like, as far as mass appeal and mainstream success, especially because of how big their box office was. This movie was a huge hit. And so
I thought it was It's Pat.
What Stuart Saves His Family, I think, was also
interesting. It is interesting, guys, because this kind of, again, we were young at the time. Brad was a couple years younger, but this was really the beginning of the SNL film renaissance that happened with
it was huge.
Adam Sandler and Chris Farley and David Spade and some of my still favorite comedies of all time, right? I mean, the things that I try to tell my kids, this is, I'm that dad. This is a funny movie,
This is comedy.
Yeah, this is real funny, you got to see Chris Farley do it. All in that, like 7 to 8 years after this, what an amazing run.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like the SNL movies, because obviously SNL movies, they had some duds, but it's it's Tommy Boy, it's Billy Madison, it's Happy Gilmore.
Not necessarily birth from sketches, but from
SNL
cast.
stardom.
And Lorne Michaels produced them, I think, a lot of them. So
exactly.
Pretty amazing, honestly, and really formative for our generation of people that are fans of comedy. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. There were some interesting things. Seeing the evolution was really interesting to me because it starts off very similar to what the movie ended up representing as far as the show is concerned. It's weirdly enough, only the first 3 sketches are in Wayne's basement. Or at least the basement as we see it in the movie with the stairs and everything. And so, those sketches, the formula they followed was like the talk show format, and then they did like a funny reenactment.
It was public access TV, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that continues, but then like the style of the sketch changes, both in the set design, because they move to like either what looks like a different basement set or like a living room set. There's no stairs anymore. It's not quite as big. It's like just a wall with wood paneling and the couch and the chair and a weird painting that's in the background. And that continues throughout the rest of the sketches as long as they go on. Until they at some point, though, they ended up going back to the basement set when they like started bringing them back for like reunions or like later episodes. But then they get into it's not until the 5th or 6th sketch that they get into the top 10 lists, like Ben said, and that's what people remember the most. And I had forgotten that it was mostly all about movie stuff, like they did the Bill Clinton one, but like that was one of the rarer ones, but most of it was about like Oscar picks or just like summer movies or like what happened.
It was reviews. Some of them that were reviews. That was what got me laughing the most. Wayne, what did you think? Garth, what did you think? And
I think it sucked. And those first few sketches were so simple too. And the first one, isn't even very good.
That's what I was telling you earlier today.
They do the same joke twice in a row, and in its entirety, they do a list of movies, they give their opinions, and then they get out a chart and they read their opinions all over again.
That was the weirdest part. I thought, I don't remember them doing this.
Yeah.
I don't remember them doing the jokes and then doing the jokes again. Like, this is so strange.
And if you've been listening to the podcast, you know we sometimes critique sketches because they're good sketches, but they go a minute or two too long.
Yeah,
that's what I thought of that one, Ben. I was like, okay.
I love, of course, I really laughed hard at the drunk driving PSA when they were doing the reenactment thing where he's in the car and and Garth has the tree going by really quickly. Yeah. My dad was howling. He's watching it with me, howling, laughing at that. We were really I mean, that I would laugh if that was on today. It's incredible. So yes, they got away from that format. And part of me is like, ooh, I don't know if they should have, because the top 10 lists were great and all, but man, they were, when it's two adolescent, almost kids that are maybe overgrown kids that are recreating those things, that the more public access part of it was really the humor for me. The top 10 lists are fine, but man, those first couple were incredible. Ed O'Neill, oh man.
Almost didn't recognize Ed O'Neill, honestly, because he was he was super young, right? I mean, might add, but also just kind of like, vulnerable in that sketch, and it was just so weird to
during
see
the Married with Children hype time. But what's really funny is that he's in the Wayne's World movie as Glenn at Stan Mikita's Donuts, but it's a completely different character. So it's they didn't carry that over. But speaking of carrying things over, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, and it's not just with Wayne's World, but Mike Myers loves to reuse jokes from Saturday Night Live in movies all the time. There are so many jokes in Austin Powers that come from various sketches, Wayne's World, Austin Powers, and all that. Like the thing with the stairs and the escalator and the canoe, it's in Austin Powers. The thing where he said, say Patrick Swayze's head so big it has its own weather system, it's a joke that's in So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Yeah.
They even did a joke twice throughout Wayne's World's run that wasn't just like a recurring joke. They made Garth get pubes twice during the run of sketches, and then that's a joke that they use in Wayne's World 2 as well. So like there's so many things that Mike Myers has recycled, and like it's so weird to me, like for somebody who is revered as being a comedy genius, albeit one who is somewhat difficult to work with apparently, that like he's kind of gotten away with using jokes that he already did before.
Which is funny because it is, what's interesting about this is, as all of us are online and these things, you've got these things, let's say, called a Sorkinism. And everyone that follows film knows what a Sorkinism is, because he reuses tropes and things like this. You never hear this about Mike Myers, though, right? Yeah. Mike Myers, because he does reuse so much of it, but that's really not anything anybody talks about until you rewatch the sketches and you realize, oh, no, like you said, and I wonder, too, if some of what he was doing was just kind of workshopping so much of the other characters that end up coming out in more full and, Austin Powers and stuff like that.
But like the jokes that he reuses are more so like it's either a visual gag or it's like a funny one-liner that he has just transferred over to
the punchline is the same, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same thing. So I was fascinated by that because I had realized that he had recycled some jokes before, but I never realized to the extent that he brought stuff from Wayne's World even into other movies.
I wonder how much that is a kind of a thing that happens with older TV shows in general, right?
Yeah.
I don't really watch a lot of old SNL, and I wonder how many, Will Ferrell movies might have something from SNL on it, things like that. Because I rewatched MASH, right, for the first time ever, and back then, when they made that TV show, the same actor would play two different characters in the same season, just like a little later on.
Yeah.
And it was because there were no such things as syndication, reruns. They were literally writing it and be like, well, just cast him. Nobody's going to remember that he played the psychologist before
8 episodes ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true. And so now, you cut to 1989 to 92, YouTube doesn't exist. These things are one and done. So why not reuse later on? Because nobody has a tape of this. And I think that there's a little bit of that going on with it.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, though, like, especially when it comes to using a Wayne's World joke from the sketch and then using it again in the Wayne's World movie, like obviously you transfer some of the vibe of like the overall concept of a sketch goes into the movie, but I don't like, aside from the basic structure of what the sketches and the characters, in most of the SNL movies, you don't see repeated jokes, with the exception of Wayne's World, as far as I can remember. Like obviously, Night at the Roxbury, the repeated gag is the dancing with the necks, and like,
you don't have Night at the Roxbury without that, though, right?
Exactly. But these are like specific jokes that that carried over into the movie. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the Garth's wig particularly improves in quality as soon as they have a sketch that happens during production on the Wayne's World movie. So I'm pretty sure they used the Garth wig from
they
the
actually
movie
had a little bit of budget,
sketches,
for a decent wig. And,
because they started shooting. It was in late 1991, and then the movie came out in 1992.
Wow, so they greenlit that pretty quickly, honestly, because
it came together quickly too, and this can kind of move into me talking to Penelope Spheeris, the director of the Wayne's World movie, because they shot this in 34 days, which is pretty crazy. And she said that they had a super tight schedule, and it was made all the more complicated by the fact that when you're dealing with a movie that comes from SNL, you have these writers who are constantly revising the script, doing new pages, and getting them to her and being like, oh, here we go. And she's like, I can't shoot this like this, because like that's not how movies work. We have to storyboard this, we have to plan shots and stuff. And so there was a lot of challenges because of that, especially because you also have Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, who are sketch comedians, and they each have their own way of like
some of the best ever lived.
And they each want to make it's the best possible. And they're like, so she does a take, and then one of them is like, no, I can do it better. And so she's like, okay, well, let's do it again. And then Dana's like, oh, well, no, I can do that better too. It's like, okay, well, let's do another take.
What's interesting about this whole thing for me is, obviously the sketch is Wayne's World, the movie is Wayne's World, right? So Wayne Campbell is the star of this, but Garth is a pivotal part, and Garth wasn't a part of the original iteration of Wayne's World, right?
Yeah.
I was telling Brad earlier that essentially Garth happened because they said, Wayne, you need somebody else in this sketch, right? You can't be the only one in this sketch. We want you to essentially have a second person. And Dana Carvey didn't know about it until he got to the read, and he saw his name on this thing and said, okay, you're going to play this character named Garth. Figure out something to do there, right? And obviously Dana Carvey can do that in, better probably than anybody else that's been on SNL, because he's such a good voice actor. He's such a good just character, guy. But, I can understand that, and you probably heard about this more, Brad, is you've got a character that Mike Myers cares deeply about. He created the character. He has brought the character to life. The character's had success primarily because of him, but yet also you've got this other character now that has a life in this universe. Was there tension there? Did you pick up any when you talked to the director?
So I mostly read about this, but apparently there was at one point where I guess Dana Carvey almost left the movie because the script as it was didn't really give Garth anything to do. It was definitely a Wayne Campbell movie, and Garth was just kind of there and not a big part of the story.
Because Mike Myers wrote it for himself.
Yeah,
essentially.
Exactly. So when he threatened to walk, they're like, okay, we'll rework the script and like make Garth a bigger part of the movie, and so that's where that came from. But aside from that, it's like the biggest challenge comes from Mike Myers having such an investment in that character and really wanting it to be his own, and clashing with Penelope Spheeris, who is just trying to make a cohesive movie. And honestly, like
in no time, right?
Exactly. And she even said that her contract wasn't finalized and they were in the middle of production.
Oh, so it's a pretty kind director to start without a finalized contract, honestly.
So it's, I think it's actually kind of a miracle that the movie is as good as it is, especially because the movie really, like, better than I think than any other SNL movie, expands so well on who Wayne and Garth are as characters and really brings you into their world outside of the TV show premise in such a cool way. Like they're fully fleshed out characters, and like having it set in the Midwest, and even though they didn't shoot really much of anything in the Midwest, it was mostly in California. They really put you in.
I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known that. Yeah,
it's crazy. And so they really did a good job of creating this whole world and this like background and rich history for these characters of them liking hockey and aside from
which Dana Carvey could not play to save his life. He didn't know anything about hockey, so which is always interesting to me because they faked that movie so well. I mean, honestly, because you would have thought. I remember almost, and this is years ago when I found out that there was. I think they've mended some fences now in professionally anyway. But when there was some rifts between Dana Carvey and Mike Myers, because I love those two guys so much. And when I realized that they didn't have an easy time working together a lot of times, I was almost heartbroken by it.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, man, like they're supposed to be best friends.
Yes, because the film makes it. Their chemistry in the film is so good, you know. And I'm gonna hand it to the director for putting that together so well, because they crafted the story to where we believed it, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think it was really what you guys were talking about, Lorne Michaels saying that don't punch down, and you don't really want to make this a negative, connotation to, like, they're not ribbing each other. It's not about Wayne making fun of Garth, really. He knows that he doesn't like the leprechaun in the sketch, right? So he does the leprechaun to kind of screw with him a little bit, right? And
another joke that they steal and put in Wayne's World too.
So there's a lot of that, like where Wayne screws with Garth because Garth is very naive, right? The character, but the characters love each other, and it's a brotherly relationship, and it's his back when it comes to it. He wants him to succeed. That was super rare, and up until I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt's characters, they don't ever have a falling out. They just are bros, and they like each other, and they support each other. Like that was similarly done in Wayne's World, where they just liked each other. There wasn't a poison the friendship moment where they had to come back from something. It was a little bit, but not nowhere near what they always do in Hollywood, right? The trope is like, I spurned my best friend and he hates me, and now I got to win him back or whatever. And
to be fair, they do have that in the movie, but it's like it's meant to, that's because of just the structure of movies itself, Wayne has to fall, he has to have his low point, which is he loses Cassandra, he pisses off Garth, and then he has to get it all back.
But I think that the characters, it does that does happen, but the idea that
it is brief, though.
It was all very positive for the most part, for the most time.
Yeah,
it wasn't this long drawn out set piece of it. It was that boom and then right back. So, and
that really, stuff like that is a product of Lorne Michaels. Actually, that's one of the things that Penelope Spheeris talked about in my interview. She said because he wasn't on set a lot. She said he was maybe around 3 or 4 days during the entire shoot, but he would watch dailies. He would offer his input every now and then. And because everyone has a Lorne Michaels impression, she did one while she was talking about the things that he said. But no, she said I don't think he would watch dailies every day, but he would call me and he would say, Penelope, you can't ever go into anything negative. Nothing negative. We only want positive stuff here.
That's a pretty good, Lorne. I'll give it to you.
And so, there was stuff that, for example, so one of the things that they couldn't fix that Lorne Michaels would have preferred that they did if it didn't cost so much was that shot of Wayne's ex-girlfriend Stacy falling through that big window.
Yeah,
they made it look a little too real because Penelope Spheeris had experience shooting action movies, so she knew exactly how to do it. But that window cost thousands of dollars, and so they're like, well, we're not shooting that again. So they didn't fix that. But one of the things that specific things that Penelope Spheeris adhered to is he said the character Phil, who is perpetually drunk and hungover and always on the verge of throwing up, apparently Lorne said he's like, if Phil's got to spew, then he can't show any vomit, he's got to pretend. And so Penelope was like, okay, well, I guess then we'll avoid that. And so
that's a great Dr. Evil, by the way.
I know.
He always had he had such weird philosophies of just always kind of being on the cusp of doing something that was vaguely naughty or inappropriate without really going for it,
Here's an interesting little tidbit for those of you that are also film fans is I just looked it up. Wayne's World had a $20 million budget, which honestly, not a bad budget for a comedy.
Especially in 1992.
In 1992, I don't know if you get $20 million today to make comedies as much because they're just not as much of a profit center as,
I mean, even worse today, they're not making.
Yeah, exactly. So $20 million in 1992 for a movie, for a comedy is pretty great, honestly.
And I think that speaks to the power of Saturday Night Live as well, just how big it had risen and how big its profile was in the 90s.
Yeah, what, $181 million?
Yeah, something like that. In 1991 or 2 money, whatever. So it's like $7 billion now, if my math is correct. So, Brad, when you interviewed the director, what's her name again? Penelope
Spheeris.
Penelope Spheeris. You've done a lot of background research on Wayne's World. Obviously, we all know the show fairly well. Was there anything in there that you were kind of surprised to learn, or anything that was kind of, something that you really hadn't known before that you thought was kind of cool?
Not anything like super in depth with that. The one thing that I wanted to ask about is the difficulty they had figuring out the brands that they used for the product placement scene.
Sure.
Because they have Doritos,
Brilliant
they have
scene.
Pizza Hut, and all this stuff. And apparently, initially, they wanted Nike for the clothing and for the shoes that Garth was going to be wearing in that scene, but Nike didn't want to do it. And I guess like it was at the last minute that they got permission like from Reebok to actually do it. They had shot all the other products that they were using and everything, and they were like, I need the shoes, I need to know what we're doing, and they finally got the Reebok approval and did that.
That's cool. Again, so many things, because I did rewatch the movie, and I'll say this: the movie aged better for me because I hadn't watched it in probably 10 years. I mean, it'd been a while.
That's a movie that I watched like at least once a year.
Yeah, I hadn't watched it in a long time, and so I was glad I did. What's that?
I've never seen it.
We'll watch it together when you get back from Tahiti or wherever you're at.
It's not really your speed anyway, Ben.
I saw Wayne's World 2. Does that help?
a little bit.
Because Wayne's World 2 didn't do as well, did it?
No, but I honestly think Wayne's World 2 is still really good. As far as comedy sequels go, I think it's one of the best comedy sequels.
Was one of those where I read that it's not necessarily critically thought of as well. Yeah. And again, my impression of all of these movies are from a 13-year-old boy that has childish humor, right? So I loved them all, right? I mean, all you had to do is put Chris Farley in a movie and I would love it. I don't care if he's out west. I don't care if he's, in Sandusky. I don't care where Chris Farley is. I'm going to love it, right?
Yeah. I don't know if this is good or bad, but we're watching the YouTube sketches right before we did this. And my dad is, sitting right next to me. We're watching these things. And any sort of innuendo joke, murders. He is just on like knee slapping, like, oh my God, that's a good one. I'm like, what? He said 2 pickets to Pittsburgh. I thought my dad was going to have a heart attack. And I'm like, why are you laughing? He goes, well, that's vaudeville right there. That's the oldest joke ever. And he's like talking about how it's like meta commentary on vaudeville and this was edgy for its time. And I remember watching it when the wall fell and communism was over. And he remembers watching those sketches. Yeah. And he brought up that, which is a good point about the actual sketches rather than the movie, was that they did that one thing every single sketch where they dropped all the comedy and went right into, the neopolitical fascism.
Yep. Yeah, they almost always did that. Yeah.
And then, of course, Garth would say, sucks or whatever. And it would just be okay. That was really well done because it was another gear that they could take the characters to, and he really appreciated that about it.
The one thing that caught me off guard that I laughed really hard at, and it's such an immature thing, is the some of the slang that they use that wasn't ever used in the movies, but like when he said "massive snoobs" as slang for boobs, I was like, that's hilarious.
Also, just for historical context, right? Worst name, Wolf Blitzer, really? How is the explosion guy?
It is interesting, though. I do hope some of our listeners that are fans of the show go back and, as Brad said, go to the YouTube channel for SNL, and they really made it easy on you. And watch some of the first ones. It's so fun to watch, but they're not great. And they're a little long. They're still working out some of their bits. They're there. The framework is there, but they're not as skilled at it yet, right? They're not. They don't have the timing perfectly yet, and so
a lot like grunge music and alternative music, this has like a grunge comedy, alternative comedy vibe. And not just because of the characters having that, style and preference as far as like their music and stuff, but just because of the kind of jokes they were going for. Like that was pretty new at the time.
Yes, it was. And it is interesting, Brad. There's probably an academic study that can be done on some of these things, because I think Ben had mentioned, in 1989, obviously my wife's Romanian, the fall of a lot of communist countries at the time, including hers. You have grunge coming to the scene. The world was changing so drastically at that time. And you can see just in these sketches, so was comedy, right? Yeah. So was comedy. And it's fun to see it, and had such lasting impact on SNL, but also just in how we connect with movies and comedy. And
because Wayne and Garth always get compared to the likes of like Bill and Ted, especially.
Yep.
But Wayne and Garth really are different than Bill and Ted because they have this ironic comedy side to them. They're not just like a couple of dipshits, even though they kind of talk like that. Like there is like an intelligent side to their immaturity and in the comedy that comes from the show. And so like it would be easy to like disregard them as like two more stoner characters, but there's a certain level of sophistication there alongside the immaturity that I think really like enhances it and makes the 90s different from the 80s.
And it was grunge before cynicism, right?
Yeah.
And so which is kind of fun because it's characters that don't care about conforming.
Yeah.
Yet they're also not cynical, which makes great comedy, right? Because I like cynical comedy as well, but some of my favorite comedy is Ted Lasso. Yeah. It fights against the cynicism, for sure. And they kind of do that. So it was a great gift, honestly, to rewatch some of these sketches, to rewatch the film on the 30th anniversary.
Yeah, 30 years this year. It's crazy. We're very old.
Tell me that when you get interrupted. Ever, you don't still say car? I still say that to this day.
Yeah,
it's the lasting impression of all those and that was the first time I knew a sarcasm one saying, I like your shirt not. And I remember going to school and saying sphincter boy, and my mom got really mad at me because I didn't even know what it was, obviously, but I got in big trouble for that one.
I remembered a time when we were getting Chinese food, and I, not even knowing what the joke meant, said, "I'll have the cream of some young guy," and my mom was like, "Brad, shut up." I was like, "What? It's from Wayne's World?" And she's like, "You can't say that.
Stop embarrassing the family, Brad."
One of the ones that I still say to this very day is if like someone is going somewhere and like I'm not doing anything or I'm just staying home, and I was like, "No, it's fine. I'll just sit here and lick the cat's butt."
I always, again, for our listeners that don't know, I'm also a pastor. Yeah, surprise. But I always do when I talk about in the past. I always go, just to try to tell people like we're going to a different timeline. And for me, it's the only way to do it, to give them some kind of physical representation that we're going to talk about something in the past.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody else gets it, but I do, and that's all that matters. So I hope you watch the movies. I hope you watch the sketches. And most importantly, I hope you read Brad's article with the director, Penelope Spheeris.
It's at SlashFilm.com. It's a full interview. I talked to her for about 15 minutes.
It's a great interview. You did a great job there.
Thanks, man.
And it'll give you a little bit of more of a backstory. It'll talk a little bit about I don't know. Can we say feuding? There's a little bit of a feud between the two of the main characters.
Think they definitely
tension, maybe.
Yeah, they're not. I don't think they're quite as candid about it anymore because they've kind of buried the hatchet. They've had some reunion panels and stuff since then where they talk about having some of the tension, but they clearly don't like hold any resentment to each other anymore about. And I think that they kind of probably avoid talking about that kind of stuff now. They just want to like focus on the good stuff that came out of the movie.
Yeah, and we'll end the show here real quick. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is Chris Rock talked about this. Is when Chris Rock left to go to In Living Color, he said one of the differences is at SNL, when you come up with a character, it's your character. You write the character, you own the character. In Living Color, if you have a good character, anybody can write for that character, right? And you just say, we're putting this character in here. And so SNL does kind of encourage ownership. And I think Mike Myers felt like he owned this character, right? Sure. And so, as I think sometimes, again, as I still love Mike Myers so much, and sometimes he can get a little bit of a bad reputation for being notoriously difficult to work with. I also understand that you created a character. It's a brilliant character, and you're protective of a character that you love, So I want to give him a little bit of props there too. Because
you're going to spew into this.
So that's all we got. We're going to be back next week, and we're going to talk about the next episode. Who's on the show next week? Bradley?
Bradford Mulaney is hosting Five Timers Club. That should be pretty fun. Hopefully better than Paul Rudd's unfortunate initiation because of terrible Omicron. And LCD Sound System will be the musical guest.
Will there be a musical number from John Mulaney and Kenan Thompson and the great, what was it, Lobster?
I don't think so.
You don't think they've made it a tradition now, though?
I mean, it is almost.
Didn't they? He's done it 4 times, but have they done it all 4 times, or is it?
They've only done it 2 or 3, but
I think they've done it 3. They've done it 3. Yeah, because they didn't do it his first time. And I think they've done it 3 times every time since.
I'm waiting for it. I hope they do it.
My prediction is he had those 3 ideas, and I think that he never got to do them, and I think he's gotten to do them. And so I think that's now we're not going to see
one with the 4th, dude. You're a comedy writer. Come up with the 4th. What does it take?
I want to see. I mean, my dream of dreams here is for Paul Rudd to come back this episode and get in on the 5-Timers Club and make that part of the sketch. It won't happen.
I still feel bad for Paul Rudd.
I would love to see a big reveal of like a lot of the old guys, 5-Timers Club and Tina Fey. I would love to just see all that. I'd love to see Martin Short as the concierge, and just really do a big, and that one can go on too long. You can do 10 minutes on that SNL if you really want to, because Paul Rudd deserves a little bit, and John Mulaney's done it 4 times already. So
do 10 minutes of that and not Judge Janine, please.
Exactly. Or you know what? Let's start it off with a top 10 list from Wayne's World, because clearly that's a great way to do a cold open that we learned. I didn't know they did it 11 times as a cold open.
Do we have Brad? I know the calendar for the next 3 episodes is out. It's 3 episodes in a row, right? So we're gonna have 3 shows in a row.
Yes,
do you remember any of the other guests on there? Or no,
I believe the second one is Oscar Isaac.
Oh yeah, I think I think one of us named him as a potential guest for this season. Obviously, got a lot of stuff coming out.
Oscar Isaac on March 5th.
He could be fun. I'm hoping he's a good guest.
Musical guest Charlie XCX, and then March 12th, Zoe Kravitz, who we'll see soon as Catwoman in the new Batman movie, with musical guest Rosalia.
I love it.
Yeah, that can be fun. So we're going to have 3 episodes in a row here after this. We'll try to get those out Monday or Tuesday, get them recorded and everything, get them to our listeners. We really appreciate everyone listening to the show and being a part of the conversation. Ben, where can people find you, man?
They can find me currently in Palm Springs, California. Brad, how about you?
SlashFilm.com, where I'm writing about TV and movies all the time, including reviewing every new episode of SNL in text form, if you like to read, on Sundays after the new episodes come out. Also, SlashFilm Daily, our podcast where we cover the biggest news and TV stories, and I'm on there once or twice a week at Ethan_Anderton on Twitter. And Nate, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me at Nate Loucks on Twitter and the Pax Pastor on Facebook, all those kind of things. Go to the 10 to 1. You can find us on Facebook, 10 to 1 podcast on Facebook, and also on Twitter. Follow us on there. I will post on our Twitter page and our Facebook page the interview that Brad did on SlashFilm with the director. And you can find all that stuff there and read it. Again, great interview. Brad, you did a great job doing that.
Thanks, buddy.
Brad, you did a really good job.
Thanks.
Not.
Man. Oh,
I did the thing. Swing, yada, yada, yada.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. Bye.